Okay, I think we can start. We waited for a couple of minutes for colleagues to join online. So we are starting the session, and yeah, thanks for joining the session online. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the International Conference on Children and Their Families using the multiple indicator cluster surveys. So I'm Jayachandran, and yeah, I'll be chairing the session today, and I work with UNICEF, and yeah, I was working as a regional mix coordinator based in Bangkok. And this I will be supported by Tatjana, my colleague, and she's a part of the global mix team. And the session today is female genital mutilation. So we have basically two presenters, and I'll be introducing them later. And before I introduce our speakers, a few words of housekeeping. This session will be recorded and hosted on the UNICEF Mix website and YouTube channel, as well as the BPA YouTube channel, and embedded on the BPA website. After this event. By attending this session, you consent to be part of this recording and further and agreeing to share the recording subsequently. Please ensure that all the participants' names are clearly visible in the list. And if you are kind of appearing as a guest, I think it will be a little bit challenging for us to respond to your questions accordingly. So you can actually, write in the chat function is kind of disabled for you. So you have to use the Q&A function to, write your questions and comments. And we also recommend you to write, one question at a time. Don't put multiple questions in one comment. And we'll try to kind of answer maximum questions within the time we have. And if we are not able to answer or respond to your questions within the allocated time, we will try to respond to you later, or you can also reach out to the presenters through their email, or you can also send us email in the mix@unicef.org email. So we will try to respond if there are any other questions. So as I mentioned, again, chat function is not available. So please use the Q&A function to post your questions and comments. And again, just one question in one comment. Don't put multiple questions in one comment or one Q&A part. So again, this is going to be recorded, and please be respectful to the participants. And your comments have it to be properly worded, and all these comments are also monitored. So please mind the language as well, so that we can manage them better. So with this brief introduction, so I'm going to introduce our first presenter, that is Raphael. And Raphael is from Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, Ghana. I hope I spelled that correctly. Pardon me if I haven't spelled out properly. And she will be presenting a paper titled Estimating the Effect of Maternal Education on Child Health and Female Genital Cutting using Microdata from Africa. So again, now over to you, Raphael. You can take the floor. Thank you. So you have, about 20 minutes to present. Raphael, please. She left, dropped out. Oh, I can't see her now. Okay, so I think I can't see her. She was online, and now it looks like she dropped out.
Okay.
That is another person. So, okay, then we will try to connect with Raphael later, so we can probably move to the second presenter, and we will try to connect with Raphael later. So the second speaker, but now, we are just trying to change the order because of the technical challenges. So the next speaker is Arianna Gonzales from Washington State University. And Arianna will be presenting the paper titled Mother Agency for Daughter Circumcision Outcomes, Cultural Moderation Across Two Multi-Country Mixed Studies. So with this, I'm requesting Arianna to take the floor and start your presentation. Thank you.
All right, I should have started sharing screen.
Yeah, we can see and we can hear also well. Thank you.
Okay. All right, and so it's not showing up on my view, my actual slides. So I wonder if it's showing through another place. Let me see. Sorry about that. Just give me a minute. My slides are not showing up on my end of the...
Okay, you have to click the PowerPoint tab to see the presentation on your screen. Otherwise, you won't be able to see. Yeah. Then you will be able to move the slides as well. Just check that.
Okay. All right, so I'm on the PowerPoint slide. I just changed the slide. Were you able to see that?
Are you moving it? No, it's not moving.
Let me see.
I think you can also click the arrow on the screen if you are able to see the presentation on your screen. Yeah.
Okay. Let me see. Did you see the change there?
Yeah, it is moving. Yes. Yeah, please go ahead.
All right, and we just see the slides, not the notes?
Yeah, we can see just the slides, so all is good.
Perfect. All right, thank you for letting me know. So yeah, why don't we go ahead and get started then. So hi everyone, my name is Arianna Gonzales, and today I will be presenting on a study that looked at mother agency for daughter circumcision outcomes, utilizing a cultural moderation analysis across two multi-country mixed studies. All right, and just a quick kind of overview of what we'll talk about today. So we're going to start looking at what we currently know regarding the literature on FGC or female circumcision. Then we're going to go over what our study looked at, the present study, as well as findings, and then impact and implications from such findings. And so what we know about the topic. So female genital cutting, or FGC, otherwise known as female circumcision, is practiced to varying degrees in parts of Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia, usually undertaken in the context of religious or coming-of-age rituals with the aim of signaling or facilitating chastity, purity, and sometimes emasculated femininity. It is most commonly seen in the rural or traditional areas of countries within which it is practiced. However, there can be negative implications for health and gender equality, as the UN has adopted a resolution to ban this practice under the guise of it being unsound from a reproductive health perspective. And it can also be a form of discrimination against women and girls, contributing to gender inequality and constricted social and economic opportunities for them. And so the practice does persist to the present day, although with somewhat decreasing frequency over time. And with all, keeping all this in mind, while there are negative implications to health and gender equality that should be kept in mind, it should also be important to consider that the UN resolution against female circumcision, or FGC, can be considered to constitute cultural imperialism. And so it may be most appropriate to assess how this practice is conceptualized and how it may impact community members by asking the community members themselves. And so looking at other existent literature, past literature does show that within countries where female circumcision is practiced, there shows to be a positive association between daughters experiencing FGC and maternal life satisfaction, which is actually in opposition of what we were expecting and what past literature reports in regards to attitudes and attitudes towards the practice. All right, so the present study investigated 2 research questions. And so the first question we explored was, do mother FGC or do mother female circumcision attitudes predict daughter FGC outcomes? And then further, our second question looked at if the strength of that association was affected by the cultural normativity of female circumcision, or FGC. So in other words, was the strength of this relationship, was the strength of this association moderated or influenced by how common this practice was in the respective country? And so just a quick rundown of how these variables were measured. So in terms of mothers' attitudes on female circumcision, they were asked a singular question. Do you think this practice should be continued or should it be discontinued? And as you can see, they had 4 options, but we did code don't know and depends into a third intermediate response. So as you can see, the responses were either continued, discontinued, or that sort of intermediate response. And as far as our dependent variable or daughter FGC outcomes, mothers were asked a singular dichotomous question, is name, so is daughter circumcised? And they either answered yes or no. All right, so based on our research questions, we thus had 2 hypotheses. And so the first hypothesis was we did expect a statistically significant association between mother FGC attitudes and daughter FGC outcomes. And so this would suggest agency on the part of mothers regarding their daughters' FGC outcomes. So in other words, we were expecting if a mom or if a mother was saying, or was having positive attitudes to FGC, and then their daughter was also experiencing or undergoing FGC, that we would see agency there. And in other words, if mom was not supportive of the practice, then daughter was not undergoing the practice. So again, seeing if there was an association there. And secondly, we expected the association strength, so the strength of the relationship, to differ as a function of FGC normativity. So specifically, we expected stronger associations, which would suggest greater mother agency in countries in which FGC was rare or not commonly practiced. And we expected a weaker association in countries in which it was common or a lot more normative. And so this would suggest greater mother agency in countries without this misogynistic practice. And so also looking at our study samples and method. So this is a list of the 2 data sets we pulled from, so mix 5 and mix 6. And as you can see, mix 5 has a series of countries, and this data was collected from 2013 to 2016. You could see we had a total sample of a little over 100,000 participants. And then that third column, all the way to the right, is listing the frequency at which FGC is practiced within the respective countries. And then looking over to mix 6, same thing, and we could see additional countries, or some countries we did see mix 5 being included, but this was a more recent data set. So data was collected from the years 2017 to 2022. And again, the frequency at which FGC is practiced is listed next to it. And so we did utilize a correlation analysis to look at our first research question. And then we utilized a moderation analysis to investigate if the association between attitudes and daughter FGC differed as a function of country level normativity again. All right, and then lastly, country level daughter FGC outcomes or frequency was calculated for each country as the percentage of daughters in the final sample for each country for whom their mothers identified as having been circumcised. And so what we're looking at is all data that was available for moms who did answer the questions pertaining to our research questions. All right, so moving on into our findings. So focusing on question 1, what is that association? Is there an association between mother's female circumcision attitude and then the likelihood of her daughter being circumcised? And so what we found was that our first hypothesis was confirmed. We saw for the full sample, associations between mother attitudes and daughter FGC outcomes were statistically and significantly positive. And so what that showed us is that daughters of mothers with positive attitudes towards female circumcision were more likely to have experienced female circumcision. But additionally, mothers who did not have, or mothers who had negative attitudes towards female circumcision had daughters who were less likely to have experienced female circumcision. And so what we're seeing there is across both samples, we could see the Pearson's correlation is 0.58 for mix 5 and a Pearson correlation of 0.34 for mix 6. So again, relatively strong positive associations. So this infers to us that across both samples, mother attitudes about female circumcision correspond to daughter outcomes. Or in other words, we did see that mother's attitudes matched those outcomes that their daughters experienced. But again, want to keep in mind that while this does infer agency, there are still definitely instances where that congruency or that attitude outcome agreement was not seen. All right, and moving on to our second question. So does the strength of that association then differ as a function of culture or female circumcision normativity? And so quickly just going over our graph. So as we see on that y-axis is the correlation coefficient, so that association. And on our y-axis, you can see the 16th percentile, 50th, and 84th percentile. And that's referring to the rate at how common FGC is practiced in the country. So that 16th percentile would infer that the practice is non-normative in that country. 50th would be that it is somewhat normative, and then 84th percentile would be countries where the practice is most normative. And so looking at our first line, so our hypothesis line, so we hypothesized that the strength of the association would be most strong in that 16th percentile. So in other words, we expected that there would be a strong attitude outcome agreement with moms and daughter outcomes in countries in which the practice of female circumcision was not normative. And as it became more normative, that agency would start to weaken, or that attitude outcome agreement would start to weaken. All right, and so from the actual data, we see that our hypothesis was disconfirmed. And we see that the trend actually goes in the opposite direction. So we actually saw the weakest strength of association in countries in which the practice was uncommon. And then as the practice became more normative in the countries, we actually see that associations start to strengthen. So overall, we're seeing that mother female circumcision attitudes were in greater agreement with their own daughters' female circumcision outcomes in high female circumcision countries, not low FGC countries. And so therefore, to the extent that attitude outcome agreement reflects agency, we see that mothers actually have greater agency in countries in which FGC practices or female circumcision practices are more normative than in countries in which they are less normative. Okay, and so now moving on to implications of such findings. And so these results do comport with prior findings of weak but positive associations between daughter female circumcision and mother life satisfaction ratings. And ironically, they raise concerns that the personal agency of mothers may be greater in ostensibly misogynistic societies. And moreover, low perceived personal agency may be a source of resistance to cultural change and anti-colonialist sentiments, And so something that we thought about or to keep in mind of why we might be seeing such findings is that the practice of daughter FGC or daughter female circumcision in cultural contexts in which it is uncommon may embody some resistance against social norms perceived as threatening to the self and culture. And so in that context, FGC or female circumcision may reflect or inspire a sense of personal agency and life satisfaction. Dr. Mary Nguesso Wangila, author of Female Circumcision, The Interplay of Religion, Culture, and Gender in Kenya, notes that the agency of the individual is becoming accepted in Kenyan communities as a way of resisting social norms. And these can be contrary to FGC. So in some, depending on the social cultural context, the practice of female circumcision may reflect various and even contradictory personal and social motivations for why women and girls undergo this practice. However, while FGC may be a form of agency and expression in countries in which it is uncommon, it's still very important to keep in mind that it can have significant and negative health implications. So efforts should be concerned with identifying and supporting alternative forms of cultural self-expression, especially to those in communities who are minoritized or feel excluded from expressing their own cultural values and heritage, and definitely practices that do not pose a risk to health is recommended. As such, looking at future directions, so future research should further investigate associations between traditional cultural practices and indicators of personal agency. It also would be worthwhile to explore potential iatrogenic impacts on personal agency that may arise from well-intended efforts to alter seemingly harmful traditional cultural practices. All right, and so that is the end of the presentation. Thank you all. If there's any questions or comments, feel free to share, and my email is also listed here if you'd like to contact or communicate that way.
Thank you very much, Arianna, for this excellent presentation. So I'm sure, the participants will be having questions. So again, reminding, please type in your questions in the Q&A box so that we will try to respond them at the end after finishing the next presentation. So good that Raphael is back online. And Raphael, we moved you as the second presenter because you dropped out. I hope that is fine. So now I think it is time for you, Raphael, to make your presentation. So over to you, Raphael. please type in questions. Yeah, colleagues. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
We can't see your presentation, so can you share your presentation, please? We are seeing the screen now. Yeah, now it's fine. Yeah, now it's okay.
All right, okay. All right, so I'll be presenting on a topic, estimating the effect of maternal education on child health and female genital cutting using microdata from Africa. And this paper is joined by Professor Stacey from University of Tokyo. So we know child health and female genital cutting, which is FGC, has long been an issue of concern for most governments in Africa, and as already iterated by the first presenter, we know that children in Africa face several traditional practices. Some of them are malnourished, and also some are exposed to illness and death. According to the UNICEF WHO World Bank 2018, we have the prevalence of child stunting in Africa to be around 30%. And also, according to WHO in 2012, we have about 12 million girls and women alive today who have undergone some form of genital cutting, and about 3 million girls are at risk of experiencing this sort of cutting, which is quite alarming. So the thing is, although these issues are prevalent, we notice that over the past few decades, there has been some sort of improvement in either child health or in these traditional practices. For instance, we notice that child health, which for the purpose of this presentation, I'll basically refer to child mortality, has reduced from 108 to 52 per 1,000 live birth between 1990 to 2017. And I believe the figure is would have improved by now. And we also noticed that the prevalence of the female genital cutting among children aged 0 to 14 actually decreased from 71% to 8% in East Africa and 57 to 14% in North Africa, and 73 to 25% in West Africa, which indicates that, of course, though we still have the practice taking place, there has been somehow improvement in these practices. So our major question we are asking is increase in female educational attainment the key to the improvement in child health and the reduction in prevalence that we are experiencing? The reason why we are asking this question is we also observed that between 1990 to 2010, the average years of education for females aged 15 and above has actually increased. For instance, it increased from 3.5% to 6.5% across the North African countries, and it also increased from 3.1 to 4%, roughly 5% in Sub-Saharan Africa. This actually has moved a lot of social advocates, social policy analysts to advocate maternal education to be an essential policy tool in improving child health and also putting a stop or an end to the female genital cutting. So our main study is, the reason for conducting this study is we noticed that there are no large-scale empirical analysis that investigate the causal link between child health, FGC prevalence, and maternal education in Africa. Hence, the reason why we undertook this study. And what does the past literature say? Of course, we are not saying this is the first study that has, or that is looking at something like this. We observe studies such as listed here that have looked at the effect of education on maternal education on child health, and also on female genital cutting. And these studies actually address the issue of omitted variable bias by exploiting various sources of exogenous changes in education attainment, where some use the college opening, school construction, and educational laws to isolate the endogenous or the exogenous part of maternal education. And they employed estimation techniques such as the difference in difference or the regression discontinuity design. Now, one thing we also looked at is, we also saw from the past study is, most of these studies actually just relied on the cross-cohort variation in exposure to the educational policy, which is a free primary education policy. And we believe that this, or they assume that all other contemporaneous changes around the time of implementing the free primary education in these countries will not have any effect. But we believe that this assumption will be unrealistic, in the sense that health system improvement, cash transfer programs, intervention for achieving millennial development goals may all be essential in affecting child health and also in affecting female genital cutting. Therefore, or in addition to that, recent studies have shown that the omission of state-specific trends, as in differences across states during implementation of educational laws, actually overstate the effect of education on various outcomes. So we also believe that, in addition to the limitation of the previous studies, we also believe that the existing studies from Africa could also be biased by overstating the effect of maternal education on either child health or female genital cutting. And another concern we also had with the past studies is the fact that there is within country regional variation in primary school enrollment before policies were implemented. And this could correlate with maternal education as well as child health and female genital cutting. That is, females in regions with lower pre-reform enrollment rate may receive greater impact of educational policy, but these females or these women are likely to raise their children in an environment with public health concern, for instance, poor sanitation. So the omission of region-specific policy intensity could also contribute to the biasedness of past studies. So the niche of our study is, one, to address the issue of endogeneity, where we exploit the rollout of the free primary education policy across 20 countries, which gives variation in reform exposure both within and between cohorts. We also address the issue of contemporaneous confounding factors by holding constant country-specific linear cohort trends and other time-varying country characteristics such as school quality, and other health indicators. We also extend this estimate, our difference in difference approach to a triple difference design that tries to incorporate the within country variation in policy intensity across regions. So as a preview of our results, and this result is basically based on our triple difference design. And from the result, we could see that exposure to the policy across African countries actually increased education attainment by a year. And we realized that this 1 year increase in education actually led to an improvement in child health, basically a reduction in child mortality, and also it also contributes to a reduction in the probability of a female child undergoing female genital cutting. And we also try to examine some mechanisms through which this effect would take place. So as a form of our institutional details and data, in all, we have 27 out of the 54 countries that implemented education policy, which we are using as an exogenous source for our maternal education. And this policy was implemented from 1958 to, at the time of this study, somewhere 2013. And the first country to undertake this free primary education policy is Tunisia. And we also noticed that between 2000 and 2013, a lot of the African countries started abolishing fees and making primary education free for all. And this education policy comes with the removal of tuition or waiving of tuition and providing students with free meals. Some also provide students with textbooks and uniforms, all aimed at encouraging students or these primary kids to stay in school. The data we use for this study actually comes from the DHS, and we also added the malaria indicator survey data, all in the aim to increase the sample size. And as already indicated, 27 countries implemented the policy, but we ended up excluding 7 because of non-availability of public data that we could use for this analysis. So in all, we have child health data. We have 85 waves of data, which amounts to 332,000 children. And the FGC data, we got 23 waves, which covers 206 girls from 120 families. So how did we identify our cohort for the analysis? So normally what past studies do is to use what we call the official school entry age. However, we realized that due to delays of school entry and repetition, we do have some kids that start school very late. So we did not use the official school entry age, but we use empirical data to determine the age at which kids go to school in these countries. So for instance, using data before the policy was implemented in Ghana, we realized that majority of our students or of the students in Ghana basically start school at age 7. And after age 7, we only have few starting school from age 8 to age 11. So in the case of Ghana, we use age 7 as the entry age, not using the official age. And in some countries, of course, the age of entering school is far higher than the the official entry age, and this is due to a lot of different factors. So this is how we determined the cohort for our analysis. So in this case, I'm just using Ghana as an example. So from the graph I just showed here, we realize that we, instead of using age 6, we're rather using age 8 as our entering age for Ghana, which with the policy which was implemented in 1996, we therefore defined cohort born before 1989 as our exposed cohort, and after 1989 as our control cohort. So this was how we determined our exposed cohort and control cohort. And for our policy intensity variable, which we defined within regions across countries, we use data before the policy, and we focus on women who had not entered primary school before the policy was implemented to define our intensity variable across regions in each country. We therefore merged this intensity variable with the data to have our sample. And this is how the intensity variable is for Ghana in this case, which is shows a variation across regions as we expected. So when we get to our empirical strategy, of course, as I already indicated, our main estimate is based on difference in difference analysis, but we extended this difference in different analysis by including an intensity variable across regions within each country. So when we look at our model of the first, which is our main model of interest, and the second one, which is our first stage model, has this dummy variable here, which captures 1 if the individual within a country is exposed to the policy or not. And these other variables captures the country-specific linear cohort trend, the cohort fixed effect, and other variables that could affect child health and maternal education. So based on our initial analysis, which is a difference in difference analysis, we could see that exposure to the policy actually increased years of schooling by approximately 1.4 or 1.5. And this is our graphical representation. However, as already indicated, the difference in difference design has its own limitation. Therefore, we try to improve on that by introducing the intensity across regions, which we define as I interacted with the exposure variable. So this variable here actually varies across region and across cohorts within each country. Then the identifying assumption for this is that in the absence of the free primary education policy, trends in maternal education, child health, and female genital cutting would have not been different across regions had it not been for the policy. So as we can see, the policy actually increased the years of education for regions that had lower intensity before the policy was implemented. So the gray dot lines or the gray lines actually refers to the low intensity regions, whereas the dark lines actually refers to the high intensity regions. So we could say that the education attainment for individuals or for females in low intensity regions actually is high due to the policy. So when we come to our first stage result, we could see that the exposure to the policy actually increased our female education attainment by approximately 1 year. And we also tried to see if it has any effect on literacy, and we saw that exposure to the policy actually increased literacy by approximately 11 percentage points. And our second stage estimate shows that the 1 year increase in maternal education actually reduces child mortality and also reduces child stunting and underweight. And we also realize that just increasing education attainment by a year for women reduces the probability that a girl child in Africa will undergo female genital cutting, which we believe is the reason for which a lot of policy analysts are advocating maternal education to be an instrument for ending some of these cultural practices in Africa. And we try to examine the pathways, and these are the pathways for improving child health. When we come to the pathway for which maternal education can actually reduce the probability of a female child undergoing FGC, we use a question in the DHS data that asked a woman's attitude towards FGC, whether the woman believes FGC to continue or whether the woman intends to cut the daughter's, to cut the daughter in terms of female genital cutting. And the result, as but though not presented here, shows that education actually also reduces women's intention of subjecting their children through these cultural practices, and also it reduces the probability that their female child will undergo such practice. So as a way of, we did a couple of robustness checks. I will not bother you with it. So as a way of policy recommendation, we try to recommend that most countries, especially those countries that have not implemented a policy, should try and do so, since the effect or the benefit of it is large, and countries that have already implemented a policy should strengthen it and should strengthen it and ensure that the various content of the educational system could also be geared towards educating the women when it comes to some of these cultural practices. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Raphael, for this nice presentation. I think, yeah, it's very nice. Good to see that, you are linking policy with achievements and all that. They're really interesting to see some of those findings as well. So I'm sure participants may have questions. So Raphael, can you stop sharing your screen? Good. So we haven't seen any questions in the question answer box. So anybody have comments, please type in there so that we can take those questions. Unfortunately, we cannot open for asking questions directly. We have some technical issues, so we cannot. So Raphael, please stop sharing your screen, please.
Okay.
That will be helpful. So any questions or comments from any participants? Okay, it looks like nobody wants to ask questions, or the presentations were so clear that all the points are okay. So we have.
May I ask the question?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Raphael and Arianna, Oh, I will need to move a little bit because we are in the same room.
Go ahead. Now it will work.
Okay, now it will work. Yeah, it's very interesting, and actually I'm far away from experts in the area, honestly. But I know that we had some discussion in African countries about FGM in general, and we were a little bit worried about this number that are decreasing, like in some countries quite significantly. And how this connects with actual introducing like very strict laws in some countries. So people actually know that if I can say, admit that, their girls went through a procedure, so they know that it will be punishment, so they are saying no, even if it's not true. So we're quite a little bit worried about how this will actually reflect, the surveys and data that we are collecting. This is one thing. And second thing that maybe it could be quite interesting, it's basically a lot of time passed when we look at the data and this decrease. So how it's actually, and also this is related to, Raphael, to your presentation about education, is it, really can we see some change in social norms and understanding? How realistic is all this? So if you can just a few sentences and comments, whatever drops on your mind. I'm interested on how relevant are those, in the whole this story when we are thinking about why data are changing.
All right, so I believe, for instance, Ghana, we have strict laws against the FGC now. So and mostly it is practiced at the northern part of the country, and it's as a result of a cultural practice of these people. So even though the country is against it, what we've actually realized is those who still want it go to the nearest country, which is called Burkina Faso. They move to Burkina Faso to get it done there because Ghana is against it. So people are actually finding ways to maneuver their ways to still go ahead to have the practice. So what I think the realistic thing is, we should keep on educating these women right from the infancy, not to wait until they get to a level before they will be introduced to this. If we start educating them right from primary one as to the dangers associated with female genital cutting, they will grow up with it, and then we can see the changes as they grow.
Okay, very much. Arianna, you want to add to what Raphael has mentioned?
No, I think he did a great
job. Thank you very much. So then, I have a small question too, because nobody else is asking, so I can ask. Arianna, my question is on your research question too, because your research question too is linking to, culture, right? So what kind of cultural related, questions from these surveys you have used? Because, it is difficult actually to capture cultural dimensions in these kind of surveys. So good to also hear from that in terms of what are the variables you have picked as a kind of cultural aspect of it. And then, your hypothesis and the findings are totally in the opposite. So is there any reason to have that kind of hypothesis set up that is totally against the kind of finding? So that is one question. And another question I have is, of course, we are seeing a decline, but what I heard from, at least from the part I live or I worked, that is like, East Asia, and, there are countries that are still practicing, but they moved from like, traditional cultural practices of FGC to medical. Okay, so how we see that, and is that still acceptable if it is done medically, or we still have it to go ahead and even, prevent from even doing that kind of medical type of practices? So these are two, questions I have. So keep the answer brief. We only have 2 minutes left to close the session. Thank you.
Yeah, those are great questions. So focusing on your first question of the cultural variable we looked at. So yeah, very hard to capture what culture is, especially using multiple countries. But our cultural level variable, so our moderation, was just looking at how common the practice or the procedure was in that particular country. So we were, again, looking at this cultural element, the moderation piece of, is this a common cultural practice? If it's not, it would be 16th percentile. If it is, 84th percentile. So that was really that cultural practice, just asking how common is this practice still utilized to date in the respective country. And then as far as the second question, I'm trying to remember what that is, sorry.
Medical vs, cultural, yeah.
The cultural piece? Yes.
Yeah, the medical, there are genital mutilation done in the health facility is vis-a-vis, culturally done practices, right? So in some countries, if it is medically done, it is kind of accepted, right? The main kind of resistance is to proceed with the cultural practice. So I want to actually hear your views. Is that okay if it is done medically, or we still have to go ahead and, stop even that from happening? I'm again not an expert, so just want to hear from you.
Yes, well, I disclaimer, I'm also not an expert. I would say that it would probably be a better option just because it's safer for health purposes. And I personally think it's still good to give community members like autonomy if that's something they truly want. But as the presentation mentioned, finding alternative ways to, follow values, or other ways to express cultural appreciation and values that don't pose such a health risk may be more ideal. But yeah, my personal view, is also not an expert, is that if it's going to be done or really wants to be done by the family, that getting it done through a medical doctor in a more safe and healthy environment would be the ideal.
Okay, I think we are, Lisa, I see your hand up, but unfortunately we cannot open up for asking questions directly. If you have any comments, please type in the Q&A box, so we will try to address them at least later on, if not now, because we are running out of time and we have to start another session soon, so we cannot extend, unfortunately. So I think with this, we are coming to the end of this particular session. So first of all, thanks to our speakers, Raphael and Arianna, for their excellent presentations. So thank you very much. And thanks to all participants for joining us for this session. That also was wonderful to see several participants joining. And again, a reminder, as I mentioned earlier, this session is recorded and this will be made available online. And please feel free to share with your colleagues or friends or within your network once this is available, online. So you can also, watch other sessions of this particular conference if you are not able to join them. And some of the sessions may be of interest, and we have parallel sessions, so even for us it is difficult to attend some of the things we want to attend. So with this, once again, thank you very much everyone for joining. Yeah, so my co-chair want to say something. Yeah, please go ahead.
Hey, I'm here. So if for those who are already started joining for next session, just to inform you that we will cut this session, the meeting will be ended, and then we will join again in less than 15 minutes. Okay, thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.